this region of the world, Austronesia, Tronesia, and Austronesian languages. There's just very, very deep diversity of languages, cultures. And if you think about place, and you want to say, well, where do we belong? Bukannya tempat yang kecil ataupun tiada significant. Because you think about United States of America or the Americas or Europe, right? But then think about Austronesia and many, many diversity of language, cultures, history, and there's a lot of richness and depth. So when we were going to have this Mountaintop about earth-centered governance and regeneration practice, I think sometimes regeneration can come from really deeply connecting with those histories, those stories, those invisible things, and finding meaning, for each of us. Yeah, so Marian, you had a great slideshow the other day in Jakarta, but today she says she's going to speak from the heart, no PowerPoint, just heart talking, and then hopefully you have questions, comments, anything at all. This is a very special moment.
Of course, we begin with a thank you, and I thank Cynthia, but there is a particular reason why this thank you is rather special. I don't know why it happened right now for this particular presentation, which is not much of a presentation as you might call it in scholarly circles, but with the invitation and with some idea of who you are, you who are there, taking time to listen to me, I thought I might try to bring you with me. As you can see, I'm an older woman. I'm actually rather old, but not to bring you into the space of conference and the kinds of presentations that are given during conferences. I thought that this time I might share with you some passages in my life. I've been a curator for close to 50 years, 49 to be exact, and a researcher for just as long. And I thought I might give you a sense of certain moments that moved me to alter how I think or how I thought. There were many pivots in the last 50 years for me. And I'd like to share with you a few that might be of some relevance to you. I hope it is of some relevance to you. The title, Satu Nenek Moyang, was from a very long ago moment. But I do know the year. It was 1989. And I was in Nusa Tenggara Timur, researching traditional textiles. To be exact, with the Tetum people of Timor Barat. And, well, you know that 1989 was a kind of rough time in Timor Barat, or Timor as well, Timor-Leste. And there's a reason why I couldn't go actually to Timor-Leste. I think you can guess. It was quite rough. But to make this very long story short, I starting focusing my eyes on things that textile scholars didn't focus on. And I was looking at a diamond pattern in ikat textiles from Timor. I was looking and looking with my co-author. My co-author is the conceptual artist Judy Freya Sibayan, so we were both there. And for some reason, our eyes were drawn into this diamond pattern because we've been obviously seeing it all over Indonesia and the Philippines. they tell us that it's called Fatukabela. All right, so we kind of understood that because Fatu in Tetum would be the equivalent of Batu, which you all understand, which is stone or rock. And it is the same thing in the Philippines as well. So Bela is interesting because it just means that Bela, this is a stone Bela. Now, Bela is that motif, they're saying it. And at that time, I was still using the word motif. I no longer use the word motif in traditional textiles or traditional weaponry now. But at that time, I was using the word motif. So it referred to a particular motif in Timorese textiles, Tetum textiles, ikat dyed. And it was a stone, or there is such a thing that they are evoking or repeating a bella, which is on a rock somewhere, which they cannot tell us where it is. So I just put that down in my notes, and I kept it aside at the back of my mind and in my notebook. But because we kept looking and looking at that motif, which obviously is something that we were seeing repetitively over island Southeast Asia, the women suddenly said, taking me into their room, and suddenly they said, "Satu nenek moyang." They seemed to understand that it's nothing that I said, it's nothing that Judy said. As a matter of fact, there was this strange dynamic that was going on all over our field work, where Judy, who actually looks a bit like a man, or because it's a small woman who was carrying cameras all the time. So I was read by them as a mother, and I would be taken into rooms while Judy was sort of outside, which suited us fine because Judy was taking the photographs. So they told us, "Satu nenek moyang." It was just a sentence. We took it aboard. We couldn't forget it. One ancestor, which meant to us, to Judy and myself, that they distinguished us from all the scholars that went to them to study. And it is because apparently they recognized us as not studying them, or it was a demand for us not to study them. Okay, I'll repeat that. I think it was both. And eventually, it was quite clear that it was both, that we were not like the rest of the scholars who went and gathered data. We clearly were not, we didn't look like any of the other scholars. We look like them. I don't think they've had people who looked like them in Timor, who came from out of nowhere and studied them. So in fact, the other side is probably actually truer. Do not study us, because we have one ancestor. A very, very tricky demand and affirmation. And I took that with me this happened in 1989. I've never forgotten that moment. And so carrying this, we want to cross Indonesia all the way to Sumatera Utara, and Sarawak. So across Indonesia, we kept bumping into variants of this word bella in textiles, in jewelry, etc. Vea, of course, WEA, or Vea, VEA, a variety of this. It was when we reached Sumatra, the Batak area, when for Judy and myself, it just dropped out of the sky, because in southern Philippine languages, bella or bilat is vulva, is the female genital organ. All right, so you have this rather deep sets of meanings, and I say sets, and I'll explain that later, where you actually are not really seeing anything unless you somehow have an insight into what is being said. And I'm not saying academically by comparative analysis, that's not what I'm saying. It seems like a kind of dreamlike state where it just comes to you that there is a level in which Vea Bella, Bella Bella is vulva or vagina. All right. I will leave that is for an academic study, but I will jump from there to say that what is this place? What is this place that encompasses the Philippines and the whole of Indonesia and Malaysia and Borneo? Well, we do have a place, perhaps not place, where more than 300 million people are speaking a family of languages called Austronesian, AUSTRONESIAN. Now, the reason I'm not showing slides or a PowerPoint presentation on this occasion, that I normally would, is because I actually want to try to encourage you to get into some kind of space where just pick up some strands. It doesn't have to be a lecture. It doesn't have to be the absorption of data, because what I'm trying to share with you is actually not data. However, let me clarify. When it comes to the Austronesian languages, we do have recourse to a massive amount of linguistic studies by the linguists of the world, and yes, a massive amount of archaeology and anthropology and sociology. And putting that all together, this is what we have. So I'll just review it for you. I'm sure some of you already know this, but let's review it. Who are the Austronesian speaking peoples? It's a family of languages. And so we know that 4,000 years ago, that's a rather certain, it's a firm date. There were people who spoke this language, a proto version of Austronesian, who came from Taiwan, which I would like to very carefully say is not full of Chinese people, not Han people, because the people who are now known as Aboriginal Aboriginal Taiwanese are Austronesian speakers. So 4,000 years ago, there were no Han people on the island of Taiwan. They went to northern Philippines and brought not only the language, Austronesian, they brought a complex that included rice, agriculture, earthenware, and particular types of jewelry made of nephrite, which is a jadeite. It's a kind of jade that comes from the island that we know today as Taiwan. So they fan out downwards. There is an alternative speculation right now, but at the moment it's still a speculation that the area of Seram, that area of the middle of Indonesia, may actually have been the origin point of the expansion of the Austronesian speaking people, but that is not consensus at the moment. The consensus is that it's from Taiwan. So these people, these modern humans, went down and populated the Philippines. However, they did meet along the way people who have been in the Philippines for, at the moment, the time frame is 65,000 years. And they are also Homo sapiens. So the people that they met along the way have been in the Philippine archipelago for that time span. And they're not hominins, they are modern humans. All right. And then, of course, Austronesian languages spread into Indonesia. And since the Malaysians are from Sumatra, essentially, so it spread to Malaysia. Now, for those of you who already know this bit of academic, this body of academic work, please forgive me. Let's just do a bit of a review so that we have this mental space. The Austronesian languages are all the languages spoken in the Philippines except the foreign languages. So the Philippines speaks only Austronesian languages, 170 Austronesian languages, plus minus, because some are becoming extinct even as we speak. And there are 10 more languages that are spoken in the Philippines, but they are Mandarin, English, French, Spanish, Hokkien. And so the 10 other languages, making about 180 languages spoken in the Philippines, are foreign. But the 170 are all Austronesian languages. Apparently, from what we know today from archaeology, the people who were in the Philippine archipelago before the Austronesian speakers arrived lost their languages. And so even they, whom you can identify as orang asli, today speak Austronesian languages. So it's literally 100% in the Philippines. Now, Indonesia speaks more than 300 Austronesian languages, but there are other language families that are spoken in Indonesia. There's some Papuan that is spoken in the Philippines, and those are not Austronesian languages. All right. So what do we have here? We have roughly, I will have to just, if you'll give me a second, I actually have to plug in. Sorry about it.
That's okay.
Oh, all right, so let's continue. I hope this is not boring for you. If you'll bear with me for just a little bit more, I think you might find
Not
it rather
boring at all, Marian.
All right, so you might find it rather exciting. So the Austronesian people, between the Philippines and Indonesia, we're talking about more than 400 languages. But the Austronesian people through Sulawesi all the way to the coastlines of Papua New Guinea to the Pacific Ocean, populated the Pacific Ocean. So all the languages in the Pacific Ocean are Austronesian. And those languages came from the Philippines and Indonesia. So they are Hawaiian, Samoan, Tahitian. The language spoken in Easter Island and the Maori people of New Zealand are Austronesian. The most recent arrival of Austronesian-speaking peoples in the Pacific are in New Zealand. The Maori. The Maori arrived in New Zealand only about 800 years ago, about 400 years before white people appeared in New Zealand. There is academic speculation that if the Austronesian-speaking peoples arrived in Rapa Nui in Easter Island, there is no reason they couldn't have arrived in Chile. And there is academic work that is working on the hypothesis that Austronesian-speaking peoples went to Chile and Peru. But we stop at Easter Island. Now, that's not the whole story. The other side of the story is that a group of people called the group of languages is called the Greater Barito languages. It's from the Barito River of Borneo, which you're familiar with. They're called the Greater Barito languages, and among them is the Maanyan Dayak. And Maanyan Dayak is directly related to Malagasy, which is on the other side of the Indian Ocean. Madagascar was reached by people from Borneo about 2,000 years ago. And so Malagasy is an Austronesian languages brought there by both Malay from Sulawesi and Maanyan Dayak speaking peoples who are related backwards to the Sulu archipelago, the Sama de Laot. So I always say this, ladies and gentlemen, your world is from Madagascar to Easter Island. And you can tell immediately that they are all islands, except for the Malays in Malaysia and the Cham people in Vietnam. There are, well, traditionally there are no Austronesian speakers on continents, which tells us a little bit about ourselves, I think. So again, we have a sense of, if we see this spread of people who have the same family of languages, then we begin to see the people who are living in island Southeast Asia as belonging to a big water world. And this is the consensus of the linguists of the world, the archaeologists of the world, until such a time that there would be some adjustments, because there really is a hypothesis that the Austronesian speaking peoples did not only originate from Taiwan, but they may have originated somewhere in Indonesia as well. That remains to be seen in science. But I'd like to just itemize for you, for those who do not know, again, pardon me, for those who do know, the biggest Austronesian language groups are Javanese. I'll read this. 100 million people speak Javanese. Tagalog, which has become Filipino. The native speakers, the mother tongue speakers, are 47 million, and there are 100 million Filipinos who speak, essentially, because Filipino, the national language, is derived a great deal from Tagalog. So 100 million people, more than that now. Indonesia, 42 million is the mother tongue speakers of, it's not Bahasa Indonesia, but Bahasa Indonesia is 270 million people. So that is actually the biggest number of Austronesian speakers in the world. Sundanese, 42 million. Malay is spoken by 30 million people. Unless you count the speakers of Bahasa Melayu and Bahasa Indonesia, that makes it close to 300 million. And then Malagasy is spoken by 17 million. Cebuano from Cebu in the Philippines is spoken by 22 million people. That's a lot of people. You are talking about, I'm going to get the actual number, close to 400 million people on Earth are literally us, speaking the same family of languages. So as a matter of fact, my challenge is if people from the Greater Barito River manage to travel to Madagascar, they probably will understand each other. All right, something that happened about between 2000 to 1,000 years ago. Clearly, knowledge of both is quite important to a group of people, a family of languages that live on islands, one half of the Earth. We are leaders, except the ones who, of course, migrated to the United States or to Europe or to Africa. Native Austronesian speakers more or less live around the equator, about 10 degrees up and down the equator. And we are 1/5. The Austronesian languages are 1/5 of the world's languages. So I hope this is new. For those of you for whom this is new, I hope that it blows your mind. And so it did once I got to understand from that long ago moment when that woman in Timor told me, Satu nenek moyang, and I started to think, are we from one ancestor? This is very difficult intellectual territory because, yes, I mean, but let's not even go into genetics because that is really a complicated terrain. But language-wise, we are quite sure that in the last 4,000 years, we are Satu nenek moyang. Language-wise, not DNA-wise, but language-wise. All right. So if you are Iban, if you are Bidayu, if you are Kadazan, if you are Cebuano, if you're Maranao, if you are from the Sulu Archipelago, Asama people, if you are Sama Dilaot, if you're Tagalog, if you're Javanese, if you are Tetum from Timor, if you're from Flores, if you're Bagobo from Mindanao or Maranao, you are an Austronesian speaker. Okay. Therefore, I always think of where I am, and I told you that ahead of time, this is very personal for me. My sense of place is this watery world? I have to confess to you, I do not have any intellectual investments on the concept of nation, and I don't have intellectual investments on from a romantic past. But because this is linguistically the consensus of science, it seems to me that I can call home this incredibly big language group living in waters, the Pacific Ocean, the littoral areas of the Asian continent, and across the Indian Ocean to Madagascar. Seems like home. You will probably define your homes in a different way from mine, but seems to me that this is home because I don't really have any other home. All right. So what do we know about Austronesian speaking peoples? Is there anything similar? Because it's a lot of languages. It's 1,200 plus languages with in one family of languages. Are we the same? Are we different? Are we, in fact, what is the balance of similarity and differences? I cannot tell you that, but I can tell you a few things that, again, we can draw from science. Kinship is very complicated territory, but we do know that Austronesian speaking peoples do not tend to be patriarchal, nor unless they have become Christians or Muslims, or completely modern people following a patriarchal system. However, you cannot generalize because the Minangkabau people of Central Sumatra are a de facto matriarchy, even if they are Muslim. And so it gets very complicated. But generally speaking, patriarchal systems are not quite Austronesian. There are many, many variations of bilateral kinship. Bilateral meaning you reckon your relatives on your mother's side and on your father's side. Okay. In the Philippines, all of the traditional societies, those who are non-Muslim and non-Christian, but also those who are Christians and Muslims, and Buddhists, of course, some are Buddhists. All of them tend towards still being bilaterally organized, even if there are existing patriarchies. There are no matriarchies in the Philippines. There are, like I said, in Sumatra. There's a lot of matrilocality, meaning to say that the man moves to the woman's village upon weddings. But it just gives you a sense of the understanding we have that societies, even today, Indonesia never had a problem having even a contested female president, but it was really no big deal. And the Philippines never had a problem with having a female president. But you can notice that, I'm sorry for editorializing, but the United States has a really hard time having a woman president. Island Southeast Asia doesn't seem to have any problems at all. The woman has always been there. Now, traditionally, the woman was generally a bailan, I don't want to use the word shaman because I don't think it applies, but a ritualist. And the male tends to be called a warrior. However, from Iban studies in particular and Bagobo studies, it is quite clear that warrior is a bad translation of a kind of honor or respect allowed to a male who has some particularly powerful personal qualities. And the woman, Bailan, who is a ritualist, and I'll go deeper into this, theme and a lot of the Pacific Ocean. Now, Iban studies in particular point out that we cannot just call this man warrior. The English word warrior, we can't translate it, because the power over life and death, the ability to kill, is not is not given to most people, to all people. And so the male of the male-female bilateral system, the male who has tremendous personal and interior power is ritually introduced into these domains of power, or was. I mean, I have such a hard time with is and was, because I do see them today in various forms as politicians who are particularly important, very good at arbitration, very good at oratory. Or arbitration is quite important, because you find that even if they're not the kepaladesa, they are still they are still the people that they go to for whatever problems there might be in community. Now, the bailan cannot be called just a priestess or a studies and Pagobo studies of peoples of southern Philippines, you and almost all of Timor and almost all of Sulawesi, you will find that that this priest who war in Iban are called the war path of women, because she doesn't dream. I think dream is another bad translation. She goes into another realm, and she goes and fights it out to have the honor of creating ikat textile patterns, because those are powerful beings in the ikat textile patterns. And she does go, and the precise words are the warpath of women. So you don't have these contemporary gender differentiations. This is completely and entirely dense territory where meaning is quite complex indeed. And I think the only thing that I'm trying to really say is, please be mindful of the complexity of things. And the rest of what I'm going to tell you today is about density and complexity. So you can't say that a man is a man because he's a warrior and translate him into a warrior, and a woman is a priestess and translate her into priestess, because both have this seamless reciprocity and exchange between female forces and male forces. Now, again, citing Iban, because I cannot cite any Bidayu or Kadazan work right now. I'm familiar, but I should be getting myself familiar as well. But just to cite from your island, the Manang Bali is a very important figure. This is the male who dresses up as a woman, who is supposed to be the most powerful of the ritualists. And this figure also existed in central Philippines and in Luzon, in the southern part of island of Luzon in the Philippines. So this male and female together was in the records of the priests who came to the Philippines in the last 400 years, was the most feared person, because this person can disappear. This person was not penetrated by arrows or weaponry, and these are in the priest records. But the Manang Bali existed in Borneo, in amongst the Iban, until the 20th century. So you see a cosmos that is bilateral. There are female forces and male forces. This we know of the Austronesian world. You will find that the figures are all paired, male-female figures. And today, whilst, as you know, Indonesia is majority Muslim and the Philippines is majority Christian, a lot of this is still operating in the societies, in Indonesian, Philippine, and even, in fact, Malaysian societies. This certainly operates in Pacific societies. And I have not been to Madagascar. I intend to find out also. So we had, those are similarities. That kind of level of complexity of the bilateral universes or cosmologies are similar, but clearly there are differences. Among the differences, well, let's just stay one moment. In the Austronesian societies that are that have remained a bit more intact than the others, you will find that these are small units, small political units. They are really villages with one leader and babaylan, priestesses. And the leader would be the equivalent of the kepaladesa. So in the Philippines, they would be the barangay captain. They're leaders of villages. And in fact, political analysts in the Philippines to this day have begun to realize that the actual political power in the Philippines is actually that person, the head of the village, deciding a lot of things. And so I have met a lot of kepaladesas in Flores and Timor and in Nusa Tenggara, Timor, and I do know that they're quite feisty individuals. And yes, that is shared. The datu status, and the ritualist, the female ritualist. And also I do not know in Eastern Indonesia because I haven't met any, but the figure who is both male and female. Just to go back to the Iban studies, headhunting, which of course was practiced in huge parts, or perhaps all parts of island Southeast Asia. The head, which is delivered to the village, is wrapped in the most beautiful ikat textiles, puakumbo, and the male and female forces tend to come together in the taking of the head and the wrapping in puakumbo. All right. Now, some of you know this because you are from that island, so pardon me if you already know this, but let me just add that in the Bagobo case, in the Philippines, there are very precise parallels. Okay, let me just very quickly tell you certain parallels. The woman who is the maker of these textiles, the ikat textiles in particular, because the ikat map is quite complicated, and I will get into it shortly. And if I don't, please remind me. The woman who dyes a particular saturation of red, and they have a name for that saturation, is only reserved for the man who has taken a life or lives. So there's that the female force and the male force, but it is also the woman who can dying expertly with her combination of leaves and twigs and roots, and it is a complete pharmacopoeia. And so the idea that she knows how to heal goes without saying, because she obviously knows the forest. She obviously knows plants enough for that saturation that is required. So that saturation, that status is actually not for rich people or an aristocracy. It is for people who are ritually mature. This I find and quality is sought after in ikat dyeing and in warfare, in the making of weapons, because textiles are female in essence and metals are male in essence. Animals, especially domestic animals like kerbau and kuda, horse, are male. Whether they're male or female horses, they're male goods. And the house is female. So the exchange during weddings is the exchange. The reciprocation is not barter, it's the reciprocation and exchange of female and male goods, which tend to be exchanges between interior and exterior of the village, and often exchanges between highland and lowland, and often between exchanges between upriver, upstream and downstream, and on and on and on and on. Now, I do not want you to come away from my sharing, I don't call this a lecture, thinking that it is all very elegant and similar across the Austronesian world, because bilateral kinship and bilateral systems have hugely articulated variations. For example, the Toba Batak, using a similar bilateral system, the Toba Batak have margas, which operate as a triune, 3 margas. So very quickly, this is the way it works. Marga 1 gives wives to Marga A gives wives to Marga B, and Marga B gives wives to Marga C. The males go to the other side of the circle. Marga A gives men to Marga C, and counterclockwise. So you see, it is still bilateral, but it has 3 groups of people involved. 1 Marga is a community. So they're just, this bilateral system is not the same, or it's not the same this and that. It has many, many permutations in the Indonesian and Philippine worlds and in the Pacific Ocean. So the important, I suppose, idea that I came away with just plowing into this literature, into these studies, studies of important scholars, is that similarity and difference, reckoning similarity and differences, is hard going. We can't really say, oh, we're all diverse, because we're not. We are speaking the same language family. On the other hand, we can't say that we're all the same, because as you can see from the Marga system of the Toba Batak is very different from the Bagobo system of just bilateral, 1:1, 1 male, 1 female, force and figure, and etc. So there, it's really wonderful to see that within a kind of similar Austronesian space, let's just call it space, but it is mostly all water. Then you have permutations, and it's really a lot of fun. And I hope you have a lot of fun figuring out how this is different. But the difference is will challenge you in terms of orders. And for those of you who are scientists, the order of difference. Some are really like differences between species, and some are differences between families, and some are differences between genus. If you might, if we are allowed to use as metaphors the biological classifications. But even if you don't think that, you just have to think that, all right, this is really Austronesian bilateral systems, but it is articulated many ways. And the many ways is the differentiation. But it doesn't mean that there is no similarity across the Austronesian world. So this intellectual suppleness that allows us to grasp how we are all alike. We are all speaking the same family of languages, but we have articulated it different ways, is what I'd like to share with you. So for those of you who are scientists, the amount of knowledge, yes, in the languages, in the 1,270 Austronesian languages, just imagine how vast the knowledge is. These are people who crossed oceans. It would still be in the languages. It would still be, if you speak the language, it will still be there. The knowledges of ocean crossing. Remember, Homo sapiens, sapiens, modern man, did not cross an ocean until the Austronesian movement into the Pacific Ocean. And we used boats. We used parao to cross from Luzon to Guam. So, if you're looking at marvels of navigation in the modern period, in the last 500 years, that's nothing compared to taking a parao across the Pacific Ocean. I mean, I'm not being like, this is not hauteur, like a nativist hauteur. Far from it, but let's call what it is. The Austronesian crossing of the Pacific Ocean and populating. How do we know that Austronesian speakers populated the Pacific Ocean? Because there were no human beings in the Pacific Oceans before the arrival of Austronesian speakers. So the first humans in the Pacific Oceans were, in fact, the Hawaiians, the Tahitians, the Samoans, who came from Indonesia and the Philippines 3,000 years ago. So that's well before the so-called age of discovery. A few thousand years, yes. Okay. Let me just go into a few more, having given that big sketch. Let me share with you a few, it's almost like cautionary words from an old woman, if you will permit me. In Timor, I came across a document which was highly regarded, and it was, I did plow into it because it's quite fascinating, because the translator of Headhunter text went into a great deal of detail how he translated. And that's quite nice, because most translators don't give, caught my attention. It's a word meow, M-I-A-O, meow, which is onomatopoeic. It means cat. It means cat in Timor, at least among the Tetum people of Timor. But it's not like a dictionary. Like in a dictionary, you see a word and you see a meaning. In this particular case, and I'd really like to share this with you because you might come across something like this. When they said there is a catness there, but they immediately mean dog. So there's a slide. They mean cat, but they mean dog. Okay. So when they slide already into dog, and the slide is simultaneous with the catness of it, there is a dogness of it in the word male. Then it's not just any dog, it's the hunter's dog. So it's the, it now moves into this complex of cat, but it is dog, but it is hunter's dog. But it's not just any hunter's dog, it is the head hunter's dog. So when they say male, or in the past, when they say male among the Tetum of Timor, they actually mean the complex of head hunting. So it's one word, it's one tiny word, male. And when you talk to people, and I am sure that this sense of it's not 1:1. When you have a mythic imagination, it's a different kind of imagination. And that may be just one tiny bit of a complex of things, which you will probably never get, or which the speaker may not actually remember at all in its entire complexity. But I just want us to be aware that there are certain words that are extraordinarily complex. Another one is bulong, which I'm sure some of you have come across. Where I grew up, bulong is to whisper sometimes. The older people know that it is sorcery, na bulungan. In certain parts of the Philippines, it means leaves. In the southern part of the Philippines, it would mean, there are dictionaries. The Tiboli dictionary, for instance, has many bulong. They list them as prayer for textiles, prayer for food, prayer for There's a lot of prayers. So bulong for textiles, bulong for this. So it translates into textile in that. It translates into prayer in that particular dictionary. But you go around the Philippines, and bulong means all sorts of things. So what is this? I did not know how to appreciate it as the threshold into a complex until I went to the Toba area and was informed that the great being of the Toba Batak is a figure named Mula Jali na Bulong. And so it's a very long name. And sometimes it is spelled in the old anthropological literature, it's spelled straight, mula jadi na bulong. But then I started investigating. There's some variations where it's spelled mula, ari na bulong. So I knew bulong as a very strange word. It really is all of the above. It's sorcery, it's leaves, it's prayer, it's whisper, because it's all supposed to be quite quiet. But mula, you all know mula. I think if you speak Bahasa Indonesia, it is the source, it's the origin, it's from where things come from. So mula. So mula jadi na bulong cannot possibly be a name. It's not a noun. It is actually a description of some kind of, well, I hesitate to call it a god. And people did not hesitate in the past to call mula jari ng bulong the god of the tuwa batak. But it is mula jari ng bulong is a description. It is descriptive. And so I was talking about this with a scholar, and he says, you missed the middle part, iari, ari. In many Philippine languages, iari is power. It's also penis. Mula iari na bulong, from the genitalia of the bulong. It's a powerful term. But of course, now it's reduced to that's the name of God. It has certainly helped me with Philippine studies, because then I began to realize that bulong is no small word. And then, of course, then I come across, very simply written texts that say the god of the Agta of Central Luzon is called Malyari. And I know that that's a shortening of Mulayari na bulong. Okay, I'm sure this will ring some bells in your ears, but just another example. I have another example that might be really profound. There is an epic of the Ifugao people. And the Ifugao people built the rice terraces. So they're magnificent terrace builders. But they have a magnificent epic that is sung only by women. It's the Hudhud, and it is inscribed as World Heritage by UNESCO. The Hudhud epic of Ifugao women. Now, as you know, Austronesian-speaking peoples of Philippines and Indonesia, where the women were the agriculturists. It was not male. Agriculture was not male. Hunting was male. So in hunter-gatherer societies, the gathering was female, and then the transformation into agriculture, well, it became women. But most importantly, if it's rice agriculture, even if it's upland rice, it's the women who go out into the fields at the first day of harvest. So they have their little cutting knives. It's a rice cutting knife. It's as small as their hand. It's very personal. And they go with their baskets. It's seed baskets. They go and take the first grain of any harvest. And what is happening there? The women are selecting by their eyes the genetic stock of the next generations of rice. You have across the Philippines and Indonesia, traditionally the women were picking the genetic material for the next generations of rice. But in the Ifugao case, they sing the epic while they're harvesting, while they're picking the genetic stock in the language of today. Okay, the science ends there. The science is established, and the humanities kind of ends there, just describing a magnificent epic that is being sung by women who harvest rice, and therefore taking care of the strength of the next the harvests that follow. But if you really think about it, you really cannot sing an epic if your head is up too high or if your head is too low. They are harvesting rice that is the height of their heads. So is it possible, and this is where we jump into the realm of the poetic, and while I encourage jumping into the realm of the poetic, I also want to caution you that you can fall, but jumping just now, and jump with me a little bit, is it possible that because they are selecting the genetic stock for the future, that the song is symbiotic with the grain, that the song has actually selected the rice. It's a thought, because the rice is exactly the height of their heads. Very interesting. But please have a sense of this, the poetic, when you do your work, because it might pass you by. You may not notice that something incredible is in front of your eyes. I should like to end with one example of scientific work which has profound implications for all of us. And I would like you to all read. If there's anything I can recommend, just read. Unfortunately, it's in French, so it'll be hard going for those who cannot read French. It's a 3-volume work called Histoire Naturelle Palawan, Palawan Natural History. The author is Nicole Revel, and she's one of the world's most important anthropologists. She spent 50 years of her life among the Palawanon people of Palawan Island. The name of the people is Palawanon. I'll be very quick with my description of this magisterial work. She went there to study epics, because the Philippines and Indonesia are full of epics. Long chance. Something for another time to discuss. But Madame Revel, at a certain point, after studying the epic of the Palawanon people, began to see the sky very clearly. So to be very quick, she plotted the Palawanon sky, where the stars are named by the Palawanon people, and they have their own constellations. And because the sky, the night sky, moves throughout the year, the movement of the stars across, of course, a line throughout the year becomes in effect, and this is what she calls it, the celestial clock. So the astronomy is perfectly fine. She worked with astronomers, not astrologers, but astronomers in Paris and New York, and the entire vast sky is named. And if there's a constellation, let's say at a certain point, it is a cue to do something in the fields. And if another constellation is at a certain point in the sky, then it's another cue. So whatever is done in the fields is cued by the night sky. And that is only one clock. And so there is a lunar clock, which is monthly and not annually. But the year and the month do not exactly correspond with the Western calendar. Okay, so this is work that cost her, not cost her, but it took her about 10, 20 years to do this, to plot the Palawanon astronomy. But then it wasn't enough, because apparently every living Palawanon at that time had thousands of species of trees in their heads. And then they were reckoning how they move in the forest, in the Palawanon forest, from tree to tree, and with names for all the trees, and male and female trees, this. And finally, each bird song, or song, has an equivalent musical form among the Palawanon people. Now, this is where I'll end. I would like to say that something that she said to me at the end of 50 years of work, having published Histoire Naturelle Palawan, she says, these are the Palawan people do not have architecture, do not have pottery, do not have textiles. They wear bark, at least until about 30 years ago. Their music is like bird music. But she says she has never seen a more cerebral people on the planet. Everything is in their heads. There's no material culture. I'd like if you could only take this aboard of your work, because you might be actually seeing people whose entire universe is in their heads. It's not the material culture. And I think this was more common in the Austronesian world than we think, because we tend to think of Indonesia as the Borobudur, the Philippines as the big churches, beautiful ones. We tend to think of Indonesia as magnificent textiles, which is, of course, it is really a hugely important creator of the world's textiles. I mean, some of the world's most magnificent textiles. But let's not forget what is in the cosmologies in the heads of people who do not show anything at all. So I'd like to leave you with that. And thank you very, very much for giving me your time.